The wind raged across the endless prairie, kicking up dust and ash from the smoldering remains of the wagon train. The acrid scent of burned wood and gunpowder hung thick in the air, mixing with the iron tang of blood. Anna Whitaker lay motionless beneath the splintered frame of an overturned wagon, her body pressed into the cold, damp earth. Her heart pounded so hard she feared the warriors would hear it over the distant crackling of dying flames. She had seen death before, a mother lost to fever, a father claimed by a river's rage, but nothing had prepared her for this. Her people, the ones who had promised safety in numbers, had abandoned her. The screams of women and children had rung out in the night, but she had not screamed. Not when the men ran. Not when her neighbor took one last desperate shot before vanishing into the shadows, leaving her behind. She swallowed against the dryness in her throat. Blood, warm and sticky, trickled from a gash at her temple, soaking into the collar of her dress. The world swayed around her, shapes shifting in the dim moonlight. She forced herself to focus. She had to stay awake. If she fell unconscious, she would not wake up again. Distant voices carried on the wind, low murmurs, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter. The warriors were still here, scavenging what little remained. She strained to make out their words, but their tongue was foreign, the sound sharp and unfamiliar. A boot scuffed against the dirt not far from her hiding place. She clenched her jaw, willing herself to be still. A shadow passed over her. She bit her lip until she tasted blood. Then silence. She dared a slow breath, but movement beyond the wagon caught her eye. A man stood at the edge of the firelight, his gaze fixed on the ruins of the settlement. Even from a distance, she could see the way he carried himself, straight-backed, broad-shouldered, his face unreadable beneath streaks of war paint. His eyes swept the destruction, scanning the wreckage with the patience of a hunter. Anna remained frozen, her lungs burning from the effort. If she moved, if she even breathed too loudly, he would see her. The moment stretched. Then, with a sharp whistle, the warriors gathered their horses. They had what they came for. As their voices faded into the night, Anna closed her eyes and listened to the sound of hoofbeats retreating across the plains. She waited long after they were gone, until her limbs ached and her fingers had gone numb from gripping the dirt. When she was certain she was alone, she crawled from her hiding place, her muscles trembling beneath her. Her body felt foreign, as though it belonged to someone else. The wagon train was no more. The supplies were gone, the horses stolen. The firelight flickered over the corpses left behind, their faces unrecognizable in the dim glow. She turned away quickly, while rising in her throat. She was alone. A sob built in her chest, but she swallowed it down. She could cry later. Now, she had to move. She forced her legs forward, stumbling toward what had once been the supply cart. A few charred scraps of cloth were all that remained. The canteens had been taken, the food stores raided. The only thing left was a broken knife half buried in the dirt. She grabbed it. The prairie stretched in all directions, endless and empty beneath a sky freckled with stars. She had no map, no compass, no sense of where to go. But standing still meant death. She turned toward the horizon, picked a direction, and walked. Hours passed. The night air grew colder, seeping through her torn dress and into her bones. Her boots dragged through the tall grass, each step heavier than the last. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. She pushed forward. Her limbs burned. Her lungs ached. The wound at her temple throbbed with each beat of her heart. The prairie was merciless, stretching endlessly with no shelter, no water, no sign of life. By the time she reached the river, the first traces of dawn were bleeding across the horizon. The water shimmered in the pale light, a slow-moving current that promised relief. She collapsed at the bank, dipping her hands into the cool depths. She drank greedily, barely pausing for breath. The cold slid down her throat, and for the first time since the attack, something inside her loosened. A branch snapped behind her. Anna froze. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she turned her head. A man stood at the tree line, watching her. Not just any man. Him, the warrior from the firelight. He was closer now, his presence unmistakable against the morning haze. His face was still streaked with war paint, his long hair tied back from his face. His expression was unreadable, but his stance was deliberate, as if he had expected to find her here. Panic surged through her. She scrambled back, but her limbs were weak, her body too drained to obey her commands. The warrior took a step forward. She gripped the broken knife tighter, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. His gaze flickered to the weapon, then back to her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared into the trees. Anna stared after him, her chest rising and falling in uneven gasps. Her hands trembled around the knife. She wanted to believe it was exhaustion, but deep down, she knew the truth. She was afraid, more afraid than she had ever been. The sun continued its slow ascent, bathing the land in a golden glow. She should have felt relief, but the unease lingered in her bones. He had found her once. He would find her again. And next time, she might not be so lucky. The Cheyenne camp loomed ahead, a gathering of hide-covered lodges standing like sentinels against the vastness of the plains. Smoke curled from distant fires, the scent of roasting meat thick in the air, but Anna barely noticed. Her wrists burned where the leather bindings dug into her skin, her body weak from exhaustion and thirst. The warriors had forced her to walk for hours, tethered like an animal behind their horses. Every step had been a battle, but she refused to let them see her falter. She kept her chin high, though fear gnawed at her ribs. The warriors had said little since capturing her, only exchanging knowing glances. Yet the weight of their decision pressed down upon her. She was not a guest. She was a prisoner, and prisoners rarely lived long. As they entered the village, children ran to see the newcomer, their wide eyes filled with curiosity and something darker, expectation. The women watched from their work, some whispering behind their hands, others glaring openly. She understood without needing words. She did not belong. They dragged her toward the largest lodge, where an older man stood waiting, his arms folded over his chest. His face bore the lines of a life spent making hard decisions, his gaze sharp as flint. The chief. His eyes swept over her, assessing, weighing. "She is worthless," one of the warriors said, nudging her roughly forward. "A settler girl. Nothing more." The chief remained silent, his expression unreadable. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken judgment. "Kill her," another voice suggested, casual as discussing the weather. "She means nothing." Anna's pulse pounded. She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from trembling. "Let her run." The words came from the warrior who had found her at the river, the same one who had spared her. His voice was calm, yet there was something behind it, something unreadable. A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Some nodded, entertained by the suggestion. Others frowned. The chief studied Anna, then the warrior who had spoken. His gaze lingered before he gave the smallest nod. "Let her run," he agreed. The warriors led her away from the camp's center, taking her to a clearing just beyond the village. There, they cut her bindings and shoved her forward. Anna staggered but remained upright, her breath sharp in her throat. "You run," one of them said, grinning. "If you reach the river before we catch you, you live." The others chuckled, the sound carrying no warmth. "And if I don't?" she asked, her voice hoarse. The man smiled wider, tapping the blade at his waist. Anna swallowed. "Run." She turned and bolted. The world narrowed to movement and breath, the pounding of her feet against the ground, the sharp intake of air into her lungs. Tall grass whipped against her legs, roots threatened to trip her, but she forced herself forward. She had no choice. Behind her, the sound of horses. They were toying with her. She could hear their laughter, their taunts. They could have caught her already if they'd wanted to. They were playing a game, and she was the prize. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She pushed harder, her body screaming in protest. The river wasn't far. If she could just... An arrow thudded into the dirt beside her. Her breath hitched. Another one landed inches from her foot. Panic surged like wildfire. They were closing in. She reached the tree line, diving into the cover of the forest. The shade swallowed her, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. She wove through the trees, ducking beneath branches, stumbling over roots. The horses could not follow here. She had a chance. Her lungs burned. Every muscle in her body begged for rest, but she could not afford to stop. Not yet. A shadow moved ahead. She skidded to a halt, her breath ragged. Strong Hawk. He stood between her and the river, his dark eyes unreadable. He had no weapon drawn, no sign of aggression. He was simply there, and his chest rose and fell, sweat dripping down her spine. Behind her, the laughter of the other warriors grew fainter. They had let her slip into the trees, lost interest in their sport. But he had not. They stared at one another, the silence heavy. She gripped the knife they had left her with, the dull blade offering little comfort. His gaze flicked to it, then back to her. He sighed. "Go," he said, voice quiet. She didn't move. "Run," he repeated. She hesitated only a moment before she did. The river was ahead. She could hear it, smell the damp air. Her legs carried her forward, through the trees, toward salvation. She reached the bank and collapsed on her knees, her hands plunging into the cold water. She gasped, her lungs drinking in the crisp morning air. She was alive. She had won, but she knew the truth. They had let her win, and that terrified her more than anything. The river had saved her life, but had not saved her from the wilderness. The water had given her a moment of reprieve, a sense of victory over the men who had hunted her, but survival was a crueler game. Anna had run, but to where? There was no settlement, no familiar road leading back to the world she had once known. She had nothing but the tattered clothes on her back and the dull knife clutched in her aching fingers. The cold gnawed at her skin, her limbs weak from hunger and exhaustion. Every step she took through the thick underbrush felt like a battle she was slowly losing. By the second night, she could no longer force herself to keep walking. She built a crude shelter beneath the twisted roots of a fallen tree, pressing herself into the earth in a desperate attempt to hold on to warmth. Her body trembled violently, and her thoughts drifted in and out of coherence. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled, their eerie voices merging with the wind. She was dying. Her breath came in slow, uneven gasps, her fingers too numb to curl into fists. She closed her eyes, accepting the quiet pull of sleep. Then a noise. Soft footsteps on frost-hardened ground. Anna forced her heavy lids to open, her vision blurring at the edges. A figure stood in the darkness, just beyond the dying embers of the fire she had barely managed to start. A man. She knew who it was before he stepped forward. Strong Hawk. He crouched beside her, studying her with unreadable eyes. In the dim light, she could see the sharp angles of his face, the set of his mouth. He said nothing. She tried to push herself upright, but her body refused. Her fingers barely twitched against the frozen earth. She hated the vulnerability of it, the weakness that left her utterly at his mercy. "Leave me," she whispered, though she had no strength to make it a command. He didn't. Instead, he reached inside his blanket and pulled out a strip of dried meat, holding it out to her. Anna's pride screamed at her to refuse, but hunger was stronger. With the last of her strength, she took it. The next time she opened her eyes, morning light filtered through the trees. A fresh fire crackled nearby, its warmth sinking into her stiff limbs. She was still beneath the fallen tree, but a heavy buffalo hide now covered her. Her pulse quickened. She turned her head. Strong Hawk sat a few feet away, sharpening a blade with slow, deliberate movements. He did not look at her, as if waiting to see what she would do. She pushed herself up, her body weak but no longer failing her. The warmth from the fire seeped into her bones, but she did not feel safe. She could not understand why he had stayed. She could not understand why she was still alive. "Why are you here?" she rasped. He did not pause in his work. "You would not have lived another night." A simple truth. No mockery, no amusement. She had nothing to offer in return for his kindness. Nothing but a weary heart and a desperate need to survive. "I don't need your help," she said, though even she did not believe it. He finally lifted his gaze, dark eyes steady on hers. Yes, you do. Days passed, and Anna did not die. She should have run the moment she was strong enough, but where would she go? The prairie stretched in every direction, endless and merciless. She had no food, no water, no way to make it alone. And so she stayed. At first, she kept her distance, but Strong Hawk did not press her with questions, nor did he act as if she was a burden. He went about his business, hunting, checking traps, preparing food. Occasionally, he left without a word and returned just the same. He never asked her to follow. He never told her to leave. The silence between them became something she could almost understand. She began to watch him more closely. The way he moved, the way he listened. He was a man of purpose, each motion precise and deliberate. He had been one of the men who hunted her, but he had also been the one to let her go. One evening, as the fire crackled between them, she dared to ask, "You defied your people when you let me go." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, he said, "You had done nothing to deserve death." She frowned. That didn't seem to matter to the others. His jaw tightened. "It mattered to me." She did not know what to say to that. The days turned to weeks. The snow melted from the ground, the bitter winds turning to crisp spring air. Anna learned. Strong Hawk never offered to teach her, but he did not stop her from watching, from copying. She learned how to set traps, how to clean a rabbit, how to ride a horse with more confidence than she ever had before. She was not a guest, nor was she a prisoner. She did not know what she was. One afternoon, a group of trappers stumbled upon their camp. Anna saw the greed in their eyes before they even spoke. A lone woman, a Cheyenne warrior. She had seen men like them before. One of them grinned, his teeth stained yellow. Didn't expect to see a settler girl way out here. Strong Hawk did not move. "She is not yours." The trapper chuckled. "That so? Maybe she'd like to decide that for herself." Anna did not hesitate. She grabbed the knife at her side, the same dull blade she had carried since the hunt, and met the man's gaze. "I already have." The fight was brief and brutal. Strong Hawk moved like a storm, swift and unstoppable. Anna had never seen a man fight like that before. He fought with no hesitation, no mercy. She did not stand aside, waiting to be saved. She lunged at one of the trappers, her knife sinking into flesh. The man fell. The others ran. When it was over, the silence stretched long and thin between them. She was breathing hard, her hands slick with blood. Strong Hawk watched her, unreadable as always. "You are not the same woman who ran from the village." No, she was not. That night, as the firelight flickered, she did not sit apart from him. She sat close. The change between them was not spoken of, but it was there, lingering in the way he handed her a piece of meat before she asked, in the way she trusted his presence beside her when she slept. One evening, as she combed her fingers through her tangled hair, she felt his gaze on her. She met it, a question, unspoken, a challenge, perhaps. She did not look away, and neither did he. The morning air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the forest alive with the soft sounds of waking creatures. Anna stirred beneath the buffalo hide, her body attuned now to the rhythm of the wilderness. She no longer woke with the sharp-edged panic that had been her constant companion in the beginning. Survival was no longer something that happened to her. It was something she had learned to claim. Strong Hawk sat by the fire, sharpening a blade with slow, deliberate movements. He had been watching the trees, listening to the world beyond their camp, as he always did. There was something different in the way he held himself, something that set her instincts on edge. She sat up, pushing sleep from her limbs. "What is it?" He did not answer right away. The knife glided along the stone in a steady rhythm before he finally said, "They are coming." A chill settled in her bones despite the warmth of the fire. She knew what he meant. The Cheyenne, his people, they had found them. She had known this moment would come, known it from the day he had defied them to let her go, from the day he had made his choice. But knowing did not make the reality any easier to face. "How many?" she asked, already reaching for the bow he had given her. She had never been a fighter, but she had learned. She had bled. Enough. She met his gaze across the fire. "You could go back. Say you made a mistake." His expression did not change. Would you? She knew her answer before he even asked. She had come too far, lost too much. She would not go back to the girl who had once been left for dead. That girl was gone. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. Then we make our stand. Stronghawk nodded. There was no hesitation in his movements, no fear in his gaze. They moved quickly, packing what they could, leaving behind what would only slow them down. They could not outrun the war party. They would have to face them. Anna felt the weight of the bow in her hands, the pull of a knife at her waist. She had killed before. She would do it again. The first sound of approaching riders reached them just as they reached the river's edge. Stronghawk turned, scanning the trees. They will try to talk first, he murmured. She set her jaw. And if talking fails? His eyes darkened. Then we fight. They came in silence, their horses moving like shadows through the trees. Warriors in war paint, their faces unreadable, their bows drawn but not yet loosed. At the center of them sat Red Bear. Anna knew him even before Stronghawk whispered his name. There was something in the way he sat his horse, the way he held himself. A man who had once called Stronghawk brother. Red Bear's gaze swept over them, lingering on her before shifting to Stronghawk. You should have returned. His voice was even, but the threat beneath it was clear. Stronghawk did not flinch. I did not belong. Red Bear's jaw tightened. You chose an enemy over your own people. Anna stepped forward before she could stop herself. I was never your enemy. Red Bear's gaze flicked to her, unreadable. And yet our brothers are dead because of your people. My people left me for dead, she said, voice steady. I have no claim to them anymore. The warriors stirred at her words, but Red Bear remained unmoved. This cannot be, he said at last. Stronghawk, you know the law. Stronghawk's fingers flexed at his side, but he did not reach for his weapon. The law is wrong. A murmur rippled through the warriors. Red Bear's eyes narrowed. You would spill our blood for her. Stronghawk did not hesitate. If I must. The silence that followed was thick as the air before a storm. Anna felt the tension coil in her chest, ready to snap. Red Bear exhaled slowly. Then so be it. The world exploded into motion. The first arrow whistled past Anna's ear, embedding itself in the tree behind her. She loosed her own without thinking, her arms moving before her mind could catch up. A warrior fell. The fight was chaos, a blur of movement and sound. Stronghawk moved like a force of nature, his blade finding its mark with deadly precision. Anna stayed close, her arrows quick and sure. She did not think of mercy. She thought only of survival. Red Bear came for Stronghawk, his blade flashing in the firelight. They met with a clash of steel and fury, brothers turned enemies. Anna barely had time to react before another warrior lunged for her. She twisted, the knife in her hands meeting flesh. Warm blood splattered her skin. The warrior fell. She turned, breath ragged, searching for Stronghawk. He and Red Bear circled each other, both bloodied, both unwilling to yield. Red Bear struck first, his blade slicing across Stronghawk's side. Anna moved before she knew what she was doing. She raised her bow. Red Bear saw her. For a brief second, time slowed. She loosed the arrow. It struck true. Red Bear staggered, his eyes widening as he looked down at the shaft buried deep in his chest. He fell to his knees. Stronghawk stood over him, breathing hard. Red Bear's lips parted, but no words came. Only the sound of the wind through the trees. The other warriors hesitated. Then, slowly, they lowered their weapons. Anna's heart hammered in her chest. Red Bear had been their leader. Without him, they had no command. Stronghawk stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the remaining warriors. Leave. They did. Anna watched as they melted into the forest, their shadows swallowed by the night. It was over. She turned to Stronghawk, reaching for him as he swayed on his feet. Blood soaked his side, but he caught her hand, holding it tightly. His gaze searched hers. You saved me, he murmured. She swallowed past the lump in her throat. We saved each other. He exhaled, his grip tightening. What now? She looked toward the horizon, the sky painted with the first hints of dawn. We go forward. And together they did. The year was 1875, and the Wyoming frontier was an unforgiving place. Sarah McAllister knelt in the scorched dirt of what had once been her home. The scent of burned wood still thick in the air. Her hands trembled as she brushed the soot from the lifeless face of her husband, James. Beside him, their son, Nathan, lay motionless, his small fingers curled as if he had fought against the inevitable. The wind howled through the ruined homestead, a cruel whisper of what had been taken from her. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. The world blurred, but the pain was sharp, real. Her family was gone, slaughtered like animals, their bodies left to the crows. The Red Jackals, a gang of ruthless outlaws, had come in the night, their laughter cruel as they set fire to her life. She had survived only because James had pushed her into the root cellar, forcing the heavy door shut before the gunfire began. She should have died with them. Sarah's fingers clenched into fists. No, she would not break. Not now. Not when there was something left to do. Her boots dug into the dirt as she forced herself up. Her dress, once pale blue, was smeared with ash and blood. She took a long, shuddering breath and turned toward the road leading into town. It was a long walk, but she felt none of the distance, only the weight of vengeance pressing on her ribs. Silver Rock was a town of cowards. She had known that long before she married James, long before she became a mother. The sheriff's office was a place where law was only a word, where justice came with a price no one dared pay. Still, she stormed into the wooden structure, the doors swinging violently against the wall. Sheriff Tate barely looked up from his desk, a man gone soft in his years. He was more accustomed to keeping the peace among drunks than hunting murderers. He sighed, scratching his graying beard. "Mrs. McAllister," he said, his tone flat, tired. "I heard what happened." "You heard," she repeated, her voice like cold iron. "And what have you done?" Tate leaned back, folding his arms. "Ain't much to be done. The jackals ride fast. Even if I had the men, and I don't, we'd never catch them." Sarah slammed her palm against his desk. "You do nothing, then?" His lips pressed into a thin line. "I'd advise you to move on. That's the way of things out here." She stared at him, her fury hot enough to set fire to the wooden floor beneath her feet. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out. The saloon was thick with smoke and indifference. Men sat hunched over their drinks, their voices low and murmuring, the weight of the frontier settling in their bones. She stepped inside, the heavy scent of whiskey curling in her lungs. Eyes flicked toward her as she walked to the bar. "Where can I find a man willing to hunt?" she asked, voice steady. The bartender wiped a glass, unimpressed. "What kind of hunting?" "The kind that ends in blood." The room went still. A man in the corner chuckled, his boot propped on the table. "You hiring killers, Mrs. McAllister?" His grin was missing teeth, his eyes like dull coins. "I'm hiring justice," she corrected. Laughter rippled through the saloon, but she did not move. One of them leaned in, rubbing his stubbled jaw. "Word is you lost your husband and boy." His tone was mock sympathetic. "Sorry for your loss." Her hands curled into fists. "Not sorry enough to do something about it. Ain't no one here gonna go after the jackals." Another man muttered. "They kill whoever chases them." She exhaled sharply, scanning the room. Useless men. Cowards, all of them. Then she heard it. A name spoken in a hushed whisper, almost lost beneath the murmur of voices. "Chaska." She turned sharply. "Who is that?" A man shook his head. "You don't want him." "I do." Another chuckle. "Sioux warrior. Hunts men like a wolf. But he won't fight for you." "Where is he?" A silence stretched before the bartender nodded toward the open door. "A few miles north, by the river." She left without another word. The ride was cold, the evening air sinking into her bones. The river came into view as the sun bled against the horizon, streaking the sky in orange and crimson. There, by the water, stood a man. He was tall, his frame lean but solid, a rifle slung across his back. His long, dark hair moved with the wind. He did not look at her as she approached, but she felt his awareness like a blade against her throat. "You are Chaska," she said. A long pause. Then his voice deep and measured. "You are far from where you belong." She dismounted, standing firm. "I seek a hunter." He turned then, and she saw his face, sharp, unyielding, eyes dark with a history she could not yet read. "I am not for hire." She stepped closer. "The men I seek kill my family." He did not blink. "Many men kill." She reached in her coat, pulling out a small, folded cloth. She threw it to him. He caught it, unfolded it. Inside, a single lock of dark hair. A child's. Nathan's. His jaw tightened, but his expression did not change. "Why bring this to me?" "One of the men wears a Sioux scalp on his belt," she said, her voice steady. He laughs about it. A flicker, a shift in his stance, so subtle she almost missed it. Finally, he spoke. "These men. Where?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I will find them." Silence. Then, he looked past her, toward the darkening horizon. His fingers closed over the cloth, then tucked it away. "You will ride at dawn," he said. "If you slow me down, I leave you behind." It was not a question, not an offer. It was a warning. She met his gaze. "I will not slow you down." For the first time since she had buried her family, she felt something other than grief. She felt purpose. The wind howled as the night closed in around them. The first light of dawn spilled over the land, stretching long shadows across the frost-bitten prairie. Sarah tightened the straps on her saddlebags, glancing toward the figure standing a few yards away. Chaska was still, watching the horizon, his presence as unmoving as the land itself. He had barely spoken since accepting her offer, and now, as she adjusted the rifle slung across her back, she wondered if he regretted it. They rode in silence, moving north through the open plains, following trails Sarah could not see. Chaska led, his gaze fixed ahead, reading the land as if it whispered secrets only he could hear. She kept up biting back questions. She was not used to being led, but she had hired him for this. Trust would come with time, or it wouldn't come at all. By midday, they reached the outskirts of an old trapper's camp, abandoned but for the remnants of a fire still smoldering. Chaska dismounted, crouching low, fingers grazing the dirt. He studied the ground, the ashes, the broken twigs beneath his fingertips. "Two men," he said finally. "One horse." They left at dawn. Sarah swallowed, nerves tingling. "Red jackals." He didn't answer right away. He stood, walking a slow circle around the fire pit, then pointed toward the grass beyond. "They're moving west." She exhaled. The hunt had begun. They pressed on, tracking through the dry grass and scattered rock formations that jutted from the earth like jagged teeth. The air grew colder as the sun climbed, the wind sharp against her face. "Why do you fight?" His voice broke the long silence between them. She hesitated, gripping the reins tighter. "Because no one else will." He nodded, as if that answer was enough. That night, they camped beneath a cluster of pines, their horses tethered a short distance away. The fire was small, its flames barely more than embers, but it was enough to hold back the creeping chill. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, watching as Chaska pulled a strip of dried meat from his bag. "You've killed before." His voice was quiet, his dark eyes fixed on the fire. She looked down at her hands, rough from work, from holding a rifle, from clawing at the dirt to bury her family. "Not like this." He tore the meat with his teeth, chewing slowly. "You will." Something cold settled in her stomach. The truth of it was undeniable. Sleep came fitfully. The wilderness was alive with sounds, the shifting wind through trees, the distant call of a coyote. Sarah lay awake, staring at the sky, wondering if James and Nathan had ever felt fear like this before they died. Before dawn, Chaska shook her shoulder. She was on her feet before her mind had caught up, heart pounding. He gestured to the west. "Riders." She grabbed her rifle. In the pale morning light, she saw them. Two figures moving slowly through the grasslands, one leading a second horse burdened with supplies. They were close. Chaska did not wait. He moved like a shadow, quiet, deliberate. Sarah followed, keeping low as they slipped through the underbrush. The riders were unsuspecting, their heads low, talking in voices too distant to hear. They struck fast. Chaska rose from the brush like a phantom, his knife flashing as he lunged at the first man. The outlaw barely had time to cry out before the blade drove into his throat, his body slumping with a sickening gurgle. The second man scrambled for his gun, but Sarah had hers up first. Her hands shook, her finger curling around the trigger. The outlaw's eyes locked onto hers, wide with something between shock and fury. "You don't want to do this," he rasped, hands raised. She did, but her hands still wouldn't stop shaking. Chaska stepped forward, calm, unwavering. "Shoot." The man lunged. Sarah fired. The bullet caught him in the chest, slamming him backward into the dirt. He gasped, clutching at the wound, his fingers slick with his own blood. His mouth moved, but no words came. Then he was still. The silence rang louder than the gunshot. Her breath was ragged, her hands cold despite the heat flooding her veins. She had done it. She had killed a man. Chaska crouched beside the bodies, rummaging through their belongings, unfazed. He pulled free a strip of leather from the dead man's belt, and Sarah's stomach twisted at the sight of what was woven into it. A lock of dark hair. Her son's hair. She turned away, ball rising in her throat. "They were scouts," Chaska said, his voice level. "The rest are further north." Sarah closed her eyes, gripping her rifle so tight her knuckles ached. She had not felt justice, only the weight of what came next. They left the bodies for the scavengers and pressed on, pushing through the wilderness with renewed purpose. Each mile was heavier than the last. The river was swollen from recent rain, the current fast and treacherous. Chaska led his horse through first, stepping carefully over the slick stones, the water rushing around his legs. Sarah hesitated at the bank, her heart hammering. He turned, watching her. Cross or stay. Gritting her teeth, she pressed forward. The icy water bit through her boots, pulling at her legs, threatening to drag her under. Halfway across, her foot slipped. The current yanked her down. Water filled her mouth, her body crashing against the rocks. She reached out, grasping at nothing, the world spinning. Then a hand. Strong, unyielding. Chaska hauled her up, his grip firm around her arm, pulling her onto solid ground. She coughed, shivering, her body trembling with adrenaline. "Foolish," he muttered. She glared at him, chest still heaving. "I had it." He didn't argue. They rode harder after that. The sky darkened, clouds rolling in thick and heavy. By nightfall, they had found another trail, tracks leading toward a ridge where an old, half-rotted cabin sat in the distance. Chaska studied it from afar. "We wait." Sarah wiped the rain from her face. For what? His eyes didn't leave the ridge. For the right moment. She clenched her jaw, impatience curling in her stomach. But she knew he was right. They were outnumbered, and she had barely managed to kill one man. The rest of them would not hesitate. So she waited. The rain fell, soaking through her coat, the night stretching long before them. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called, its cry lonely and low. She did not sleep. Tomorrow, blood would spill again. The night stretched long and unyielding, rain pattering against the leaves, sliding in slow rivulets down Sarah's back. She had stopped shivering hours ago, her body resigned to the cold, to the ache of waiting. The cabin in the distance was dark, its walls slumped with age, but inside, she knew the men who had destroyed her life were drinking, sleeping, unaware of what was coming. Chaska crouched beside her, still as stone. His breath was measured, his gaze locked on the distant hideout. He had not spoken much since they found the trail, but she had come to understand him in the silence. Every movement of his eyes, every slight shift of his stance spoke volumes. He was waiting for something. Sarah's fingers curled around a rifle in her lap. "We go at dawn," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the rain. He glanced at her, unreadable. Not yet. Her patience frayed. Why not? They'll be drunk, slow. It's the perfect time. He turned back toward the cabin, his expression hard. One mistake and we die. She hated that he was right. Hated that he was calm when she was a storm inside, when her blood screamed for action, for justice. Her family had not been given the luxury of careful planning. They had died in fire and chaos, and she wanted these men to die the same way. She forced herself to breathe. Then soon, the word grated against her ribs, but she said nothing more. Hours passed. The rain slowed. The first whisper of dawn bled across the sky, turning the world the color of old bruises. Chaska moved first, slipping from their cover with the silence of a predator. Sarah followed, heart pounding against her ribs. The closer they got, the heavier the air felt, thick with the weight of what was about to happen. The cabin door creaked when Chaska pushed it open. Inside, the smell of sweat and whiskey clung to the stale air. The men were sprawled across the room, boots kicked up on tables, guns within reach, but their minds dulled by drink. Sarah counted 4. Her grip tightened on her rifle. Chaska moved fast, knife flashing as he slit the throat of the nearest man before the others even stirred. The gurgling sound yanked them from their sleep, and suddenly the cabin was alive with motion, with shouts and curses and the scrape of chairs against wood. Sarah raised her rifle. A gunshot cracked the air, and pain ripped through her shoulder. She staggered back, biting down a scream, her vision flaring red. Chaska was a blur of motion, moving between them like a phantom, steel slicing flesh, the wet crunch of bone breaking beneath his blows. Another man fell, blood pooling beneath his body, and for a moment, Sarah thought they might win. Then a boot crashed against her chest, knocking her rifle from her grip. She hit the ground hard, breath shattering from her lungs. Hands wrenched her up, fingers biting into her bruised skin. She fought, kicking, clawing, but they were stronger. A fist cracked against her jaw, and the world spun sideways. When she opened her eyes, she was outside, tied to a post, the morning sun glaring down like an unforgiving god. Her head throbbed, her shoulder burned, and her wrists ached where the rope cut into them. Laughter. She lifted her gaze. 3 men stood in front of her, the survivors of the ambush. One of them she recognized, the leader, Callum Wade. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face lined with a kind of cruelty that had no need for words. "Well, ain't this a surprise?" he drawled, crouching in front of her. His eyes flicked over her, slow and calculating. "I heard you were dead. Guess we should have made sure." Rage boiled beneath her skin. She bared her teeth. "You'll wish you had." Wade laughed, standing. "That right?" He turned his head slightly. "Where's the engine?" One of his men spit into the dirt. "Took off. Figured he'd run soon as it went bad." A knife twisted in Sarah's gut, sharp and deep. No, that wasn't right. Chaska wouldn't have run, would he? Wade shook his head, amused. "Left you to die. That's rich." She wanted to believe it was a lie, that Chaska was out there, watching, waiting, but doubt coiled inside her like a snake. The gang leader crouched again, reaching forward to grip her chin. His fingers were rough, cruel. "I could kill you quick, but that don't seem fair. Not after all the trouble you caused." Her pulse thundered. She was going to die. Then movement, a shadow shifting just beyond the edge of the trees. Chaska. Hope surged through her so fast it made her dizzy. He hadn't left. He had been waiting. Wade's hand slid down to her throat, fingers tightening. "Maybe I take my time with you." A sharp whistle cut through the air. The gang leader stiffened, head jerking up, and then an arrow buried itself in his throat. Chaos exploded around her. Wade stumbled back, choking, blood bubbling from his mouth. Another arrow flew, striking one of his men in the chest, knocking him to the ground. Chaska emerged from the trees, moving with deadly precision, a knife in one hand, a bow in the other. He did not hesitate. He did not speak. He was vengeance incarnate. The last outlaw fumbled for his gun, but Chaska was faster, the knife sinking into his gut, twisting. The man gasped, shuddered, and then fell. Silence. Sarah's breath came in ragged gasps. Chaska stepped toward her, pulling his blade free, and in 2 swift motions he cut the ropes binding her wrists. She sagged forward, but he caught her, steadying her with a firm grip. "You left," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I waited," he corrected. Something unspoken passed between them, heavier than any words. Then he pulled back, his fingers grazing her injured shoulder. "Can you ride?" She swallowed, nodding. "I can ride." They left the bodies for the carrion birds. By the time the sun crested the ridge, they were miles away, riding hard toward a future neither of them had planned for. The wind carried the scent of blood and dust, a cruel reminder of the battle left behind. Sarah's hands trembled against the reins, her shoulder throbbing where the bullet had grazed her flesh. The pain was a dull roar now, swallowed by exhaustion and the weight of what they had done. Chaska rode beside her, his face unreadable, his presence steady. He had saved her life. Again. And yet, the air between them remained thick with things unsaid. Ahead, the land stretched empty and wide, golden in the afternoon light. The ridge loomed in the distance, and beyond it, the last of the red jackals, the ones who had slaughtered her family. Callum Wade had been their leader, but he was not the last of them. There were others, men just as ruthless, waiting in the hills, unaware that their time was running out. Her fingers tightened around the rifle resting against her thigh. Chaska pulled his horse to a stop. "We're close," he said, his voice low. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Then we finish this." He studied her, his dark eyes searching. "Are you ready to kill again?" She looked past him, toward the ridge, toward the memories of her husband and son buried in the scorched remains of their home. She thought of the night she had hidden in the root cellar, too afraid to move while their screams were stolen by the flames. "Yes." Chaska gave a slow nod, then dismounted. She followed suit, her legs stiff from the ride. They moved carefully, picking their way through the rocks and dry brush, staying low. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the land. Voices carried on the wind. Laughter, the clinking of bottles. Sarah's heart pounded. She pressed against the boulder at her side, gripping the rifle so tight her knuckles ached. She stole a glance around the edge of the rock. 3 men. One sat on an overturned crate, cleaning his pistol. Another leaned against a post, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. The third, the one with a jagged scar running down his cheek, stood stirring a pot over a small fire. A fourth man stepped out from a crude wooden shack, rolling his shoulders, stretching. He looked familiar. Sarah's stomach turned. She knew his face. He had been there that night. The one who had shot James. Heat surged through her, her pulse deafening in her ears. Chaska placed a hand on her wrist. "Breathe." She allowed a slow breath, steadying herself. She would not let rage blind her. Chaska moved first, silent, deadly. The man at the fire never saw the knife coming. He barely made a sound before he crumpled, the pot toppling into the flames. Sarah raised her rifle. The man cleaning his pistol looked up, startled, just as she pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the hills. He fell back, clutching his chest, eyes wide with shock. The others reacted fast. The man at the post scrambled for his gun, but Chaska was quicker, slamming his tomahawk into his skull with a sickening crack. The last one, the one who had killed James, ran. Sarah took off after him, her boots kicking up dust. He crashed through the underbrush, desperate, his breath ragged. She raised the rifle, her aim steady. "Stop," she ordered. He skidded to a halt, his hands raised. "You don't have to do this," he panted, his voice edged with fear. Sarah stepped closer, her grip tightening. She could still hear James' voice, soft in the morning light, telling her that she deserved a life of peace. She could still feel Nathan's tiny hands wrapped around her fingers. She thought of everything she had lost, and everything she could still have. Her finger hesitated on the trigger. Behind her, Chaska appeared, watching, waiting. The man's expression shifted, hope flickered in his eyes. "Please," he whispered. Sarah inhaled sharply, lowering the rifle. "Go," she said. He blinked, stunned. "I said go." He didn't hesitate. He turned and ran, his figure disappearing into the hills. Chaska exhaled slowly. "Mercy." She swallowed, her throat tight. "No. Justice." The camp was quiet now, the bodies still, the fire smoldering. It was done. She turned to Chaska. "What now?" He studied her for a long moment. Then, he reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "You decide." She searched his eyes, finding something there that had not been before. Maybe it had been there all along. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying the ghosts of the past away with it. And for the first time in a long time, she did not feel lost. The first shot shattered the silence of the prairie. Birds scattered from the lone cottonwood tree, their wings a flurry of movement against the morning sun. The second shot followed, and this time the scream came. Daniel's body hit the dirt, his weight kicking up dust. His eyes, wide with shock, sought hers as his hands trembled over the fresh, blooming wound in his chest. "No, no, no," she gasped, dropping to her knees, reaching for him. Blood soaked through the pale fabric of his shirt, staining the place where her head had rested just hours before. His lips moved, but no sound came. The world shrank to just them. Then the outlaw's boots stepped into her vision. A heavy shadow cast over them both. Silas Graves. He smiled as he rolled a cigarette between his fingers, his pistol still smoking in his hand. "Sorry, missus. Your man wasn't smart enough to listen." Her breath came in ragged, panicked gasps. The 5 men behind him loomed like hungry wolves, the same ones that had circled their homestead the night before, demanding Daniel's land, demanding their home. Daniel had told her to stay inside, told her not to come out no matter what. She hadn't listened. Now he was dying in the dirt, and she was left staring into the cold, dead eyes of a killer. Silas tilted his head as if considering her, then crouched down. The leather of his coat creaked as he reached out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. His breath stank of whiskey and cheap tobacco. "You want to live?" he asked. She didn't answer. Silas smiled wider. "Didn't think so." He shoved her backward, hard, and she hit the ground as he stood. "Burn it," he said to his men. Terror surged through her as she scrambled to her feet. "No." The first torch was thrown onto the porch. Flames licked up the wooden walls, spreading like hunger itself. The house where she and Daniel had dreamed of raising a family, of growing old together, was devoured in an instant. She screamed. Silas just laughed, pulling himself onto his horse. "Ain't nothing personal, missus. Just business." Then they were riding away, kicking up dust as they vanished over the horizon. She barely noticed when her knees hit the ground again. Daniel's body was still warm when she curled herself over him. She stayed there long after the flames turned their home to ashes. The shovel felt heavier with every stroke. She had dug the grave alone, sweating under the ruthless afternoon sun. Her hands, raw from the wooden handle, bled onto the parched ground. No priest, no words, just silence as she lowered Daniel into the hole. Her breath hitched as she reached out, brushing her fingers over his cheek one last time. Then she buried him. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, only a wooden cross stood over the fresh mound of dirt. The name carved into it was uneven, jagged. Daniel Hawthorne. She sat beside the grave, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the fading firelight in the distance. The outlaws had stopped in town, no doubt drinking, laughing. She clenched her jaw. Her hands shook, but not from fear. Not anymore. She rose. Inside what was left of their barn, half collapsed from the fire, she found Daniel's rifle, his Lancaster repeater, miraculously untouched by the flames. Her fingers curled around the wooden stock, and for the first time since the morning, she breathed. She took what else she needed, bullets, a knife, the revolver Daniel had kept by their bedside. Then she mounted the only horse the outlaws had left behind and rode toward town. The Red Lantern Saloon pulsed with light and drunken laughter. She stood outside for a long moment, staring at the place that had taken the men who had taken everything from her. The wooden steps creaked beneath her boots as she climbed them. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and whiskey fumes. She saw him immediately. Jed Barnes, one of Silas's men. He leaned against the bar, a half-empty bottle in his hand, laughing with a woman draped over his lap. His words slurred as he boasted about the day's work. "Never seen a man drop so fast," he said, shaking his head. "Poor bastard didn't even get to raise his gun." The woman laughed, unconcerned. "And the wife?" Jed grinned. "Pretty little thing, but she ain't gonna last long." His words made the saloon spin around her. She stepped forward. No hesitation. The Lancaster's barrel pressed against the back of his skull. The saloon went silent. Jed stiffened. "What the?" "This is for Daniel." She pulled the trigger. The gunshot roared through the saloon like a thunderclap. Blood sprayed across the bar as Jed collapsed forward, the bottle shattering on the floor. Screams erupted. Chairs scraped against the wood as people scrambled back. She turned, rifle still raised, eyes meeting every single person in the room. A man reached for his gun. She fired again, this time at a whiskey bottle near his hand. Glass exploded. "No one moves," she said. A cold, perfect silence followed. The bartender, hands raised, took a cautious step back. "Ma'am, I'm not here for you." Her gaze swept the room. "You tell Silas Graves." She let the words hang, let them soak into every terrified man and woman in that saloon. "I'm coming for him." She turned, stepping over Jed's body, and walked out into the night. She could feel the whispers already forming behind her. The legend beginning. Widowmaker widow. And the hunt had just begun. The night air carried whispers. Some spoken in fear, others in awe. A woman had walked into the Red Lantern Saloon, killed a man in cold blood, and left like she had nothing left to lose. The name had spread before dawn, rolling across the town like a ghost story. Widowmaker widow. She rode through the blackened fields, the wind slicing cold against her face. Behind her, smoke still curled from the remains of her home. But there was no turning back. Not now. Not ever. By the time she reached Black Hollow, the town was stirring to life. Oil lamps flickered in windows. Wagons rattled along the dirt roads. Merchants setting up their stalls. Women sweeping dust from porches. It looked the same as it always had. But something was different now. They stared at her. Some with wide eyes, others with cautious glances. A few tipped their hats, stepping aside. She wasn't just another widow now. She was something else entirely. Sheriff August Lane met her outside his office. A tall man, gray creeping into his beard, revolver hanging loose on his hip. He took her in, gaze lingering on the rifle strapped across her back, the dirt and blood staining her clothes. "You should leave," he said. She didn't move. Lane sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You got any idea what you started?" "I do." His eyes darkened. Jed Barnes was a bastard, but killing him in front of half the town? That ain't something a woman like you walks away from. She looked past him toward the wanted posters fluttering on the wooden board outside his office. Silas Graves. His men. Their faces leered back at her, the inked bounties a fraction of what their lives were worth. "I'm not walking away." Lane exhaled through his nose, glancing up and down the street. People were still watching. He stepped closer, voice low. "You're making enemies you can't outrun." She met his gaze. "I don't plan on running." For a moment, there was nothing but the wind kicking up dust between them. Then Lane gave a slow nod. "Then you best be fast." She left him there, boots heavy against the wooden planks as she stepped into the general store. The owner, Josiah Keller, stiffened at the sight of her. A round man, balding, with the nervous hands of someone who had lived too long under the rule of outlaws. She placed a handful of coins on the counter. "Ammunition. Supplies. Whatever this gets me." Keller hesitated, eyes darting to the street outside, as if Silas himself might be watching. She lifted her chin. "I won't ask twice." He swallowed hard, then moved quickly, pulling a sack from behind the counter. Boxes of bullets. Dried meat. A canteen. "Careful, miss," he muttered as he handed it over. A woman alone don't last long in these parts. She took the sack, adjusting the weight on her shoulder. "I'm not alone." And she was gone. The trading post sat at the edge of town, tucked between the bluffs and the river. It was where outlaws passed through, where stolen goods changed hands, where men like Silas's crew thought they were untouchable. That's where she found them. 4 men. 5, if Silas was there. She waited, crouched in the shadows of an abandoned shack, watching the flickering lanterns through the windows. They were inside, drinking, laughing. She slipped closer. The night smelled of damp earth and tobacco smoke. Every step was deliberate, careful. She needed an advantage. The horses were tied out back, their reins looped loosely over the hitching post. She pulled her knife from her belt and severed them with a single, swift motion. The animals wouldn't go far, but when the time came, they'd be gone. Next, she crept toward the side entrance. A barrel of lamp oil sat near the door, half empty. She tipped it just enough, letting the slick liquid seep into the dirt. A crash came from inside. Laughter. A bottle breaking. She moved fast, stepping through the back door, rifle raised. Lenny Carr, one of Silas's crew, turned just as she entered. His whiskey bottle lifted to his lips, head tipped back. He barely had time to lower it before she pulled the trigger. The shot tore through him, slamming him back into the wall. The room exploded into chaos. Buckley Hayes reached for his gun. She shot first. The bullet caught him in the chest, sent him staggering into the table. The other two went for the door. She lit a match and tossed it onto the oil-soaked ground. Fire roared to life, blocking their escape. One of them, Charlie Dodd, turned, teeth bared in a snarl. "You crazy bitch." She shot him, cutting off the words before he could finish. The last one, Clive Mercer, made it to the window, shattering the glass as he dove through. She stepped over Charlie's body, firing into the flames. A second later, she heard the horses galloping away. Clive was running. She led him. The fire spread quickly, consuming the old wood, crackling as it climbed the walls. She turned back, breathing hard. The bodies lay where they had fallen, blood mixing with the dirt. She reloaded. 3 down, 2 to go. Stepping back into the night, she mounted her horse and rode after Clive, the flames behind her painting the sky in shades of orange and black. By the time she reached the outskirts of Silver Creek, the trail was fresh. Clive had left a mess in his wake. Branches broken, hoof prints deep in the softened earth from his frantic escape. He wasn't thinking. He was running scared. She followed him into the canyon, her rifle resting easy against her saddle. The moon hung high, casting long shadows. The sound of rushing water echoed off the stone walls. Ahead, a flickering light. A small campfire. She dismounted, moving low, keeping to the rocks. Clive sat hunched, gun in his lap, eyes darting into the darkness. He was shaking, muttering to himself, "Dead. They're all dead. Silas is going to kill me." She stepped forward. The snap of a twig made his head jerk up. His gun came up fast, but she was faster. She kicked the weapon from his hand, knocking him onto his back. He scrambled, but she leveled her rifle at him. "Where is he?" Clive's breath came in shallow gasps. He coughed. His lip was bleeding. Please don't." She pressed the barrel against his forehead. "Where?" He swallowed hard. His body trembled. "Old Fort," he gasped. "Up in the mountains. Near Devil's Pass. That's where Silas is." She stared down at him, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. Then she pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the canyon. Clive's body slumped to the ground. She exhaled, stepping back. Silas Graves was waiting for her, and she was coming for him. The wind howled through the canyon, threading through the jagged rocks like a whispered warning. She stood over Clive Mercer's still body, watching the blood seep into the dirt, disappearing into the cracks of the earth as though the land itself were swallowing him whole. His last words clung to the night air, unshaken by the gunshot that had silenced him. Devil's Pass, the old fort, Silas Graves, ***. She turned her gaze toward the mountains looming in the distance. The shadows stretched long beneath the moon, jagged peaks cutting into the sky like the teeth of some slumbering beast. Somewhere up there, Silas was waiting, and she was coming for him. She retrieved her spent casing from the dirt, slipping it into her pocket. The weight of her rifle felt heavier now, not from exhaustion, but from the certainty of what lay ahead. She had burned through the men who had stolen her life, but Silas was different. Killing him wasn't just revenge. It was an ending, a reckoning. She mounted her horse and rode toward the mountains, the wind at her back and the scent of blood still thick in her nostrils. By the time dawn broke, she had reached the base of the foothills. The land grew rough here, steep, uneven, riddled with switchbacks and narrow passes where a single misstep could send a horse tumbling to its death. The trail would be slower now, the climb harder. She wasn't alone. The moment she stepped down from her saddle, she felt eyes on her. A presence just beyond the trees, watching. She kept her hands loose by her sides, close to her revolver, but not on it. Not yet. A branch snapped. the whisper of movement through the underbrush. Then a man stepped forward, his silhouette outlined by the rising sun. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark braids framing a weathered face. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, studied her as though he could already see the blood she carried. "You're the one they're whispering about," he said. She met his gaze without flinching. "And you are?" "Tawodi," he said simply. "Cheyenne." She let the silence stretch between them. He nodded toward the rifle slung over her back. "You hunt a man." "I do." His expression didn't change. "Silas Graves." She tensed, fingers flexing near her holster. "You know him?" Tawodi's lips curled slightly, though it wasn't amusement. "I've tracked him before. He and his men took from my people. Stole, burned, killed. He is a coward who thinks himself a wolf." His eyes narrowed. "You go to his den alone?" "I don't need help," she said. Tawodi tilted his head. "Perhaps not, but the mountains do not care about your revenge. They swallow those who do not respect them." She exhaled, glancing toward the distant peaks. Every instinct screamed that she should keep moving, that she had no time for conversation. But she wasn't a fool. She knew the dangers of the wilderness, and if Tawodi had been tracking Silas before, then he knew more than she did. She looked back at him. "You know the way." He nodded. "Then show me." The climb was brutal. The path twisted upward in sharp inclines, forcing them to lead the horses on foot. The morning sun burned away the chill, but sweat slicked their backs as they moved. Tawodi led with sure steps, navigating through dense pines and sheer rock faces with the ease of someone who belonged to the land. She followed, listening, watching. "You fight like someone who's lost everything," he said after a while. She didn't answer. He didn't press, only nodded as though he had already known the truth. Revenge is a cold fire. It burns without warmth. She adjusted the strap of her rifle, gaze fixed ahead. "That's fine. I don't need warmth." Tawodi studied her for a long moment, then simply said, "We'll see." The river crossing tested them both. The water ran swift and deep, churned by the spring melt. Tawodi moved first, guiding his horse through the shallows, but halfway across, the current caught the animal's legs. He barely had time to shout before he was pulled under. She moved without thinking, diving into the freezing water. The cold was a fist around her lungs, stealing the breath from her chest as she fought against the rapids. Tawodi surfaced, gasping, his hands scrabbling against slick rocks. She reached him just as the current tried to drag him deeper. Her fingers locked onto his arm, and she hauled him toward the far bank with every ounce of strength left in her body. They collapsed onto the rocks, coughing water, chests heaving. Tawodi turned to look at her, surprise flickering behind his eyes. Then slowly he nodded. "You could have let me drown," he said. She wiped the water from her face, breath still ragged. "Wouldn't have been right." For the first time, he smiled. "Just a little. Maybe you are not as cold as you think." By nightfall, they had reached the edge of Devil's Pass. The old fort loomed ahead, a crumbling ruin perched atop the cliffs. It had once been a military outpost, abandoned after the war, left to the crows and the rot. Now belonged to Silas. A fire flickered within its broken walls. Shadows moved along the ramparts. Tawodi crouched beside her, scanning the fort. 6 men. She frowned. "Should be 5. Tawodi pointed toward the eastern watchtower, where a figure leaned against the wooden rail, smoking. Reinforcements, maybe. She clenched her jaw. Time was against them. If more men were coming, the odds would shift. Tawodi turned to her. "We move at dawn." She nodded, but sleep didn't come. She sat with her back against a boulder, staring at the distant fire, feeling its warmth even from here. She thought of Daniel, of their home, of the life that had been stolen from her. Silas was up there, and come sunrise, she would finish this. The sky bled with the first streaks of dawn. A cold wind rolled down from the mountains, rustling through the pines, whispering through the ruins of the fort. The fire inside its broken walls had burned low, its embers pulsing like dying stars. She crouched beside Tawodi, her rifle nestled against her shoulder. The night's silence had stretched thin, taut with waiting. Now, the time for patience was over. She adjusted the grip on her rifle, steadying her breath. "We move now." Tawoti didn't argue. He only nodded once, his own knife gleaming in the dim light. The plan was simple. No theatrics, no grand gestures, just cold, brutal efficiency. They moved like shadows. The damp earth muffled their steps as they slipped past the ruined outbuildings, past the skeletal remains of the stockade fence. The walls were crumbling, the wood long since turned brittle by wind and time. She pressed against the stone, heart steady. 2 men by the fire, 1 on the watchtower, 2 more at the gate. Silas would be inside. She lifted her rifle. A breath, a squeeze of the trigger. The sentry on the tower jerked back, a red mist blooming from his skull. The moment his body hit the ground, she and Tawoti moved. A heartbeat of silence. Then, shouting. The 2 men by the fire were scrambling for their guns, eyes wide. She fired again. The first went down, clutching his throat. The second staggered, reaching for his rifle. Too slow. Tawoti's knife flashed in the dim light. The man slumped forward, his lifeblood spilling into the dirt. The 2 guards at the gate turned, one fumbling for his revolver, the other already raising his shotgun. She dove behind a pile of broken crates as buckshot tore through the air, wood splintering around her. Tawoti rolled to the side, a second blade flying from his hand, burying deep into the nearest man's chest. The last one turned to run. She didn't let him. The Lancaster's barrel followed him, her fingers steady on the trigger. A single shot rang out. The man collapsed. And then silence. The air smelled of blood and gunpowder. 5 down. Only 1 left. Silas. She moved through the ruined corridors, past rooms long since emptied of purpose. Her heart drummed steady in her chest, her pulse a slow, deliberate rhythm. The storm in her mind had quieted. No hesitation, no fear. Footsteps echoed in the hall ahead. She lifted her rifle. A door swung open. Silas Graves stepped into the dim light, his revolver already raised. She threw herself sideways as the first shot shattered the stone behind her, dust and debris cutting into her cheek. Rolling to one knee, she fired. The bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him back through the door. She followed. The room was empty except for a table, a chair, and a man she had hunted across miles of dust and death. Silas gritted his teeth, pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder. He looked at her, then laughed. "Well, ain't this something?" he muttered. "The little widow made it all this way." She kept her rifle leveled, stepping forward. "You killed my husband." Silas smirked. He got in the way. She pulled the trigger. The rifle clicked empty. Silas moved fast. Too fast. He lunged, his revolver swinging up. She threw the rifle at his face, buying half a second as he flinched. Then she was on him. The world collapsed into violence. She drove her fist into his gut, feeling the air rush from his lungs. He staggered, but his elbow cracked against her ribs, sending pain lancing through her side. She didn't fall, didn't stop. She reached for her knife, but Silas caught her wrist, twisting hard. She snarled, using the momentum to drive her knee into his ribs. He grunted, stumbling back, then swung his pistol-like club. The metal crashed into her temple, and the world exploded into white-hot pain. She hit the ground hard, the taste of copper in her mouth. Silas loomed over her, panting, blood dripping from his split lip. "That all you got, widow?" he taunted, cocking the hammer of his revolver. She looked up at him, her vision swimming. Then she smiled. Silas frowned. That was when he realized. Her knife was still in her hand. Before he could fire, she drove the blade deep into his thigh. Silas screamed, the gunshot going wide as he stumbled back. She kicked out, knocking him off his feet. The revolver clattered to the floor. She was on him in an instant, straddling his chest, her knife pressing against his throat. His breath came in ragged gasps, his fingers twitching toward the revolver just inches away. She pressed harder, the blade biting into his skin. "Go on," he rasped, eyes burning. "Finish it." She could feel his heartbeat against the blade, could feel the weight of every moment that had led her here. Her husband's laughter, their home, the life they had dreamed of, gone, because of him. Her fingers tightened on the hilt. Then she slashed the knife across his throat. Silas choked. His body jerked beneath her, blood spilling from the deep, gaping wound. His hands clawed at his neck, desperate, fading. Then stillness. She sat there for a long moment, breathing hard. The storm inside her went quiet. She rose slowly, wiping the blade against his coat. Then she stepped outside. The night was still. The fires had burned low. Tawodi stood near the entrance, waiting. She met his gaze. "It's done," she said. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "Then let's leave this place." She didn't look back. By the time they reached the canyon, the first light of dawn had begun to touch the peaks. The sky, for the first time in weeks, was clear. She took a slow breath, tasting the air. It felt different, lighter. Tawodi mounted his horse. "Where will you go?" She stared down at her hands. The blood had dried. The scars would remain. Finally, she looked ahead. "Wherever the road takes me." Tawodi nodded once. Then, with a small, knowing smile, he turned and rode into the morning. She stood there for a moment longer, listening to the wind, to the sound of the world moving on. Then she mounted her horse, and without another word, Widowmaker Widow rode into legend.